A majority of keyboard layouts are going to be exactly the same, regardless of the type or the make or the model that you use. But I did want to just go over quickly what the keyboard parts are. Remember that each type can be slightly different, especially when you talk about laptop keyboards versus a regular desktop keyboard. Laptop keyboards can often have keys in different places, so you might need to become more familiar with your laptop than you do with a regular desktop keyboard. All of them are going to have alphanumeric and symbol keys. This is called the QWERTY layout, by the way, and if you wonder where that name came from, just look at your keyboard. If you look at the first line of letters, they're QWERTY, so the QWERTY layout is the easy way. That's opposed to an alphanumeric layout that you might see, say, at an airline kiosk. If you've ever tried to check in using an airline kiosk, those are alphanumeric, meaning they just go A, B, C, D, not necessarily the same way a keyboard would be laid out. If this layout seems odd to you, just know that when they first created typewriters, somebody really thought about this, and they put key combinations so that they are easier to work with than it would be if you simply lined up the letters and numbers in alphanumeric order. You're also going to see any set of standard keys. These can include the Shift key, Caps Lock, Tab, Escape, Control, Alt, a Windows key, arrow keys, Page Up, Page Down, Home, End, Backspace, and even more. Now these may seem very foreign to you right now, but these are actually keys that you will use very often. For example, when typing, you're going to use the Shift key to make an uppercase letter, or if you want to type in all uppercase, you might use the Caps Lock, so you don't have to hold the Shift key. Likewise, the Tab key can be used, but it does different things. The Tab key can either move you across a page if you're doing word processing, or it can move you from field to field when you're filling out something like an online form. We won't talk about all of these now, but as we work through this course, we'll talk about many of these keys and how they can be used as shortcuts for menu commands. These are the function keys that I mentioned in the last lesson, F1 through F12. Now these function keys actually have special uses, and the use depends on what application you happen to be working in. The one I can tell you right now is that F1 almost always brings up a help window. All the rest of them, though, F2 through F12, will do very different things depending on which operating system or which application you happen to be working in. As I mentioned, you also might have a 10 keypad for quick numeric entry, which is great when you're trying to enter a lot of numbers. Accountants especially love this. And you might also have those special media or computer keys. With this in mind, let's actually take a look at an actual keyboard so we can see where all of these different parts reside. Now remember, this actually is just a sample keyboard, and your keyboard may be a little bit different. I've also brought up a picture of a keyboard that is used sometimes for people with visual impairments. So what you will notice is that the print on these keys is much larger than it might be on a regular keyboard. That's just so we can see things better for this particular demonstration. The function of the keys, though, and the location for most of them will be very similar in all keyboards. Naturally, we're going to begin with those alphanumeric and symbols that we've talked about. If you're familiar with a typewriter, this is going to be the same. But you know what? It's interesting that in the generations of these days, many people, especially younger people, have actually never touched an actual typewriter. The only thing they know is the keyboarding. In fact, we don't even find typing classes anymore. They're all keyboarding classes. So for those of you who are a little bit older like I am, we can understand and kind of smile about the fact that typing and typewriters are actually a fairly old technology. Instead, we'll call it keyboarding. But the alphanumerics that we see highlighted here are going to be the same. This is the QWERTY layout that we were talking about before. When we're typing, we often need to work with making capital letters, or using symbols instead of numbers, typing in all capital letters, or erasing letters by backspacing. So I've highlighted here the Shift keys, which can be found on both the left and right sides of the lower part of the keyboard. We also have the Caps Lock. The one highlighted on the upper right is the Backspace, which allows you to erase or go back from the right to the left. And I've also highlighted the Enter or the Return key, which is how we go to a new line in a computer or do a paragraph break. Won't get too much into that one because that's more about word processing, but these are very basic keys that almost everybody uses anytime they're typing some type of text. Next comes the 10 keypad. As you can see, the layout is very similar to what a 10 key would be, or a calculator. You also see along the top and the right edge that we have the basic mathematical symbols. the / for division, the asterisk for multiplication, the dash for subtraction, the plus sign for addition. There's also an enter key, which allows you to set an entry. And another key that's important is on the upper left. This key is the numlock key. If you ever are typing and you're trying to type numbers on your 10 key, but instead it's moving the cursor, it means you need to press that key. When this is disabled, you can see, for example, on the number 4, there's a left arrow. If the numlock is not on, then pressing the number 4 is actually going to move your cursor to the left. Likewise, the number 6 moves it to the right, the number 8 moves the cursor up, the number 2 moves it down, and you can see that there are other things there as well, like page up, page down, home, and end. So, if your 10 key isn't typing numbers and you want it to, press the numlock key. The more common way to move your cursor using the keyboard is to actually use the cursor or the arrow keys, usually located between the alphanumeric keys and the 10 key. These are simply up, down, left, and right, and will move your cursor in that specified direction. Just above this is a set of 6 special keys that actually I use quite a bit. They include insert and delete, home and end, page up and page down. Insert actually toggles you between insert mode and overtype mode, which again we won't talk about here because that's a word processing thing. Delete is kind of the opposite of backspace. When you press the backspace key, it erases things to the left of the cursor. When you press the delete key, it deletes things to the right of the cursor. The delete key can also be used to remove something that's selected. So, for example, if you left-clicked on a file to select it and then pressed delete, it would delete that file from the computer. The home key moves your cursor to the beginning of a line, and the end key moves it to the end of a line. And page up and page down simply scroll your screen up or down in the appropriate direction. Now we get to some special keys. There is one on each side of the spacebar, the Control key and the Alt key. The short version of this is that these keys, usually in combination with other keys, allow you to do special things. For example, pressing the Alt key and a letter will display a menu. Alt F, for example, displays the file menu instead of having to click on it with the mouse. The Control key usually does system things. For example, Control P prints something, Control S saves something, and Control O will open something. These are some shortcuts that we'll go through again as we move through the course. But just so you know for now, Control and Alt are often used in combination with other keys to perform special functions. Recent keyboards will also have a Windows key of some sort, and this is used for doing special Windows things. And I'll demonstrate some of these when we get into talking about the Windows desktop. One of the things it does, though, is this is the same as clicking on the Start button. So again, if you didn't have a mouse or you didn't want to move to your mouse, you could press this button on the keyboard to display the Start menu, which we've already seen a couple of times in this course. Then we get to those function keys, which I've mentioned a couple of times, F1 through F12. F1 almost always will bring up help for whatever you happen to be in. So if you're looking at the Windows desktop, it will bring up help for Windows. If you were in Microsoft Word, it would bring up help for Word. The rest of the function keys do very different things depending on the specific application that you're in, and that's part of learning about those software programs. The last key that we'll talk about is the Escape key. Now I love the Escape key because it does some nice things. Basically, the Escape key lets us back out of something. So if I selected something and I didn't want to go ahead and click on something inside of that, I could press Escape to get out of it. If I display a menu, it will hide the menu. If I opened a dialog box, pressing Escape will close the dialog box without having to click or without having to make a choice. We'll talk more about the Escape key as we work with some special applications as well. So now when you look at the keyboard, you can see that instead of just being a whole bunch of buttons, they actually are located in specific areas, and those areas tend to do specific things. You may or may not use all of the buttons, and I don't care if you do. What I do care about is that you're familiar with what each of these can do, even if it may have a special function within a certain piece of software or application. So when you want to use the keyboard, what do? Well, I think everybody knows that we can simply press the key. So if I want to type ABC, I'll press the A key, the B key, and then the C key one at a time. What you may not have known, unless of course you happen to do it on accident, is holding down a key repeats that key entry. Now you can adjust how long of a delay there is before it starts to repeat and then how fast it repeats. And these are some of the keyboard settings that we'll talk about in the next lesson. Also know that there are special key combinations. When I just said you wanted to type ABC, I said you would press A and release it, then B and release it, and C and release it, and that would type those 3 letters. But sometimes you actually want to hold down multiple keys at the same time. For example, when I said you could do Alt-F for the File menu, you want to press and hold the Alt key, and then press the F key while you're still holding Alt in order to do that. And other things, for example, Control-Alt-Delete, which is a very common combination to do things like restarting your computer, you need to hold down all 3 of those keys at the same time. Anytime you want to do some plus sign between it, and that's how you know that you should be holding them down instead of pressing them individually. Alt plus the letter key, for example, Alt-F as I mentioned, is a common combination, most often seen to access a menu instead of having to use the mouse. The Control key plus a letter key, such as Control-P, Control-S, or Control-O, is going to do some type of system command, like printing, saving, or opening a file. And then kind of the granddaddy of all key combinations to know, Control-Alt-Delete, when shown this way, means that you're going to hold down all 3 of those keys at the same time in order to execute whatever needs to happen. In this case, it will give you the option to restart your computer. Now that you're familiar with some of those, let's take just a few seconds to see how they actually can work using a keyboard on our computer system itself. From the Windows desktop, I'm going to double left-click on my Project Files folder. And then I'm going to double-click the Mouse and Keyboard Skills document. And that actually opens this document up. Now we can do a lot of different things with the keyboard that will be easy for you to see using a word processing document. And we'll start off by using the arrow keys, the set of 4 keys between the 10 keypad and the main set of keys on your keyboard. You'll notice that right now there's a blinking cursor, a blinking vertical line before the W in Welcome to the World of Personal Computing. I'm going to walk you through the keys that I'm pressing to show you how I can move the cursor. If I press my right arrow once, twice, 3 times, you'll see that every time I press the right arrow key, it moves over 1 character. Likewise, if I press the left arrow once, twice, and 3 times, it moves the cursor back to the left, 1 character at a time. If I press the down arrow, that moves me down 1 line at a time. So I'm pressing it down once, twice, 3 times, and again I've moved down 3 lines, and the same would happen if I press the up arrow 2 times. Now let's move up to the set of 6 keys that are above the arrow keys. Remember that we have an end key. Notice that my cursor is now blinking about 1/3 of the way across the first line of text. If I press Home, which I'm doing now, it moves my cursor to the beginning of that line. And if I press End, it moves the cursor to the end of that line. So this is much faster than going left, 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 left for however many characters there happens to be. Home will move it to the beginning, move it to the end, and then you can use the arrow keys if you want to move 1 or 2 characters in the other direction. I'm going to press my down arrow 1, 2, 3, 4 times, and also press End to make sure that I am at the end of the last line of text. My computer might ding at me to let me know that it's currently at the end of the document, and even though I pressed the End key, it can't move any further. Now I'm going to press the Enter or Return key, which is going to force it to move to a new line. And if I press Enter 1 more time, it will force yet another line. Now I'm going to move to the left side of my keyboard and find the Tab key. The Tab key can do a variety of things, but in word processing, it moves your cursor across the page. So I'm going to press Tab once, twice, 3 times. What you'll notice is that it's basically moving 1/2 of an inch at a time. So if you were trying to indent the first line of a paragraph, or if you wanted to offset type by having it in further than the left margin of the document, the Tab key can help you do that. Remember, the Tab key also does special things. For example, if you're working in a form, In that case, the Tab key will move you from one field to the next field instead of having to click with your mouse and then moving your hands back to the keyboard to continue to type. Now I'm going to use the numbers on my keypad. If I simply press 1, 2, 3, we can see that it types those letters. But now I'm going to press the num lock or the numbers lock key. Currently, my computer has the number lock on. That's why I'm able to type these digits. But if I press the num lock key, that will turn it off. And now if I press, for example, the number 8 key, that's the same as using the up key, because instead of being a 10 key, it's now simply moving the cursor. So remember, if it's not behaving the way that you want, usually that means not typing numbers, you probably just need to press your num lock key. On some keyboards, there will be a special light that will show you when the number lock is on, or it may actually show up somewhere on your operating system or your window. For example, in Microsoft Word, NUM will appear in the status bar to show you that your number lock is on. Now I want to show you one of my special keys. And remember, I've been talking a little bit about the key combination called Control P. I'm going to go ahead and press and hold the Control key, and then press the letter P on my keyboard. And this is displaying the print dialog box. There are a few other ways I could have brought this up, which we'll talk about in later chapters, but this is one of my favorite keyboard shortcuts, because when I'm typing along, I can very quickly press some key combinations to do several things very quickly. For example, I might do Control S, Control P, Enter. Control S saves my document, Control P prints my document, and then pressing Enter is the same as clicking on the Print button, and that actually sends it off to print. You have to trust me when I say that's a lot faster than moving my hand to my mouse, going to the File menu, coming down and clicking Save, clicking back on the File menu, clicking on Print, and then moving my mouse to the Print key, pressing that button, and being done. Key combinations can often be much faster than using the mouse. It doesn't matter to me which ones you use because they all do the same thing. I think you'll just find eventually that it's faster and more efficient to use keyboard shortcuts when they're available. One of those keyboard shortcuts that I want to show you now is the last key we talked about when we looked at the keyboard itself on screen, and that is the Escape key. The Escape key is often the default or the same as pressing Cancel. We have a Cancel button on the bottom of this window, and I could click on it to close the box without printing. But I can also press Escape, which I'll do now. That makes it go away, which is perfect. And now you've seen a little bit about how your keyboard can work within a word processing document. I'm going to move over to the right side of this window and do a single left click on the red X to close it out. Since I've added some changes, I am not going to save these changes. So I'm going to do a single left click on the button that says Don't Save. Then I will also close out the folder by clicking on the red X on the top right side of its window. Before we finish up though, I promised I would show you an example of an on-screen keyboard. So I'm going to click on my Start button. If you're using Windows Vista or Windows 7, you'll be able to do exactly the same thing I am. If you're using Windows XP, this option isn't available, at least not quite as easily. So let me just demonstrate it to you here. I'm going to type On-Screen Keyboard. Type the whole thing, and on-screen keyboard is displayed at the top, so I will press Enter, which is the same as clicking the highlighted option. This is an example of an on-screen keyboard that comes with Windows Vista. Technically, this is part of the accessibility, so for people who may not be able to use a regular keyboard, they may be able to use the on-screen keyboard instead. I could use my mouse to click on these keys, or I could simply press the equivalent key on my keyboard. The point is that this is what you might see on a lot of mobile devices or things that have touch screens. These are the type of variations that you'll see a lot of. Now, if this isn't the issue, the ability to type on a keyboard, then maybe your issue could be just typing itself. Well, that's not exactly what this class is about, but let me make a quick recommendation. If you need some typing help, there are some free typing tutorials you can find on the internet by simply searching for free typing tutorial. There's also some software that's been around for forever, and while I usually don't make specific recommendations, this one I will. It's called Mavis Beacon Teaches Typing, and it's the equivalent of the old keyboarding classes or typing classes that some of you may have taken in the past. It takes you through some drills and just lets you practice and get more efficient at typing. In my opinion, though, the best thing that you can do is to simply start using your computer. You have to trust me that when you just start using it, very quickly you will get much faster and much more proficient at your typing skills. But regardless, now you're familiar with what keyboards do, what some of the different regions or areas of keys are, and even seen some examples of how you can use them on your computer. The Windows operating system actually has some settings that can adjust how the keyboard behaves, just like we had settings for the mouse. Fortunately, the keyboard only has a couple of settings, unlike the mouse, which can be very time-consuming. Let's go ahead and take a look at these, though, by moving down to the bottom left of the screen and clicking on our Start button. If you're on Windows XP, you would then need to click Control Panel and then double-click your keyboard settings. On Windows Vista and Windows 7, we can simply type Keyboard. Now, I could certainly take my mouse, move up near the top of the Start menu, and click on Keyboard. But because we're talking about the keyboard, I'm going to use my arrow keys instead. On-screen keyboard is currently highlighted, but if I press my down arrow twice, once, twice, then it highlights the keyboard command I actually want. Then I can press Enter on the keyboard to launch this. Now I'll move up and we'll take a look at the couple of options that we have here. For the keyboard, they include the repeat delay and the repeat rate. The repeat delay determines how long, if I hold down a key, before the computer starts to repeat that letter. So for example, if I held down the letter A, would it immediately start typing A, or would there be a little bit of a delay? The second thing is how fast does it repeat? So let's do this. Let's first of all click and drag and move the delay to a long period of time, and likewise move the repeat rate to slow. Now I'm going to click down at the bottom where it says click here and hold down a key, and we'll actually see how this works. Now I'm going to do some counting because you can't actually see. I'm going to press and hold the A key, and then I'm going to count so we can see how long until the second A appears, and then we'll also see how fast it repeats. So I'm pressing A now. 1, 2. Now you saw that there was kind of a delay there. Let me do that again. I'm using my backspace key to get rid of those A's. Hold, and there it goes. Now keep that in mind when I move these to the other end. Now I'm going to say that I want a short delay, and I want it to repeat very quickly. Now I'll move back down and I'll click, move my cursor out of the way so you can see it, and now press and hold now, and you can see almost immediately, and it's a lot faster. Now for this particular computer, I'm not seeing as much of a difference as I do on some other computers. So actually, your operating system, your processor, and a lot of other different things like hardware can make a difference on how this appears. The point is that if you're ever typing and you tend to be the kind of person that presses your keys slowly and maybe tends to hold them down a little bit longer than a faster typist, if you end up getting multiple letters when you didn't want them, you can come in here and you can say, I want to make the repeat delay longer, and I want to make the repeat rate slower. That way it will work the way that you want it to. The one last thing that we have in here that's not completely related to the keyboard, but it's at the very bottom of this dialog box, is something called the cursor blink rate. For most people, the default is going to be comfortable, and we can see it over here. If you want to make it go faster, you can drag the slider, and you can actually bring it all the way down where it actually is none. Now I don't ever recommend that, because if you look at this, we have a hard time seeing that that's a cursor. It looks more like it could be a letter L. So we always want to have it somewhere. The point is that you want to have it fast enough that it's easy for you to see, but not so fast. And honestly, one of the reasons they added this is because they have found the blink rate for people who may have seizure tendencies can actually cause them to have small seizures, sometimes larger ones. That's not something we want. So for most of us, it's just going to be an optical thing. How do we want to see it? But for other people, there may be some medical reasons why you want to slow down your cursor rate. That's all we wanted to look at. So I'm going to go ahead and click Cancel because I don't want to save any of these settings. And now I know how to set up my keyboard to behave just the way I want it to accommodate the type of typing style that I